Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and welcome back to today's live Q&A. My name is Cheryl. I'm head of outreach at Inside Uni, and I'm going to be your chair for today. Inside Uni is a non-profit student-led project aiming to make Oxford and Cambridge applications more accessible. So what we do is we crowdsource application advice from current students, which you can find for free on our website, insideuni.org, and we've put this link in the description box below too. Now, today's Q&A on applying to Oxbridge from African countries is the last video in this cycle of our International Undergraduates Live Q&A series. So we came up with this series as we realized that the student experience, whether this is about the application process or general student life, can be quite mysterious, especially from an international student's point of view. So we're hoping that you'll get a chance to have your questions answered by our lovely panel of current students today. We have some pre-submitted questions, but we'll also be taking live ones. So please feel free to use the YouTube chat function to introduce yourself and say which country you're from and what subject you're in. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the panel to introduce themselves. So let's start with Khalid.
Hi, my name is Khalid Adedanton. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria. Prior to going to Oxford, I studied A-levels for my school leavers qualifications, and I currently study law at Balliol College, Oxford.
Okay, hi guys. My name is Mara Kiti, and I am a politics student at Trinity Hall, Cambridge University. Prior to applying, I did A-levels in the UK.
Hi everyone, my name's Arika Amara. I'm entering my 4th year of engineering at Trinity College, Cambridge. And before this, I did my A-levels at Greenstead's International School, Nakuru, Kenya.
Hi, I'm Yassine. I'm from Sudan, and I'm doing maths at Downing College, Cambridge. And before that, I did IB in Sudan.
Hi, my name is Tabitha, and I study economics at Jesus College, Cambridge. And before that, I did A-levels in the UK, and before that, I did secondary school in Lagos in Nigeria.
Cool. Thank you very much for our panelists for introducing themselves. So I'm just going to get them to talk a little bit about, what made them apply to Oxbridge and kind of, why they chose to apply to Oxbridge as opposed to different universities. So again, we'll start with Khalid.
Personally, for me, the decision to go to Oxford had a lot to do with the tutorial system and also the way our examinations are structured. So for those of you who don't know, at Oxford, typically our main source of learning is our tutorials, which is usually a 3-on-1, a 2-on-1, and sometimes a 1-on-1 class with whichever professor or tutor is teaching that specific module in your subject. And what it means is that we have a lot more time and a lot more space to discuss what we have read about, what we've written about with our tutor, because there are less people in the class. The examination structure had a lot to do with the fact that mostly nothing matters until 3rd year. It's our degree classification is completely decided by our 3rd year exams, which I personally enjoy because I feel like the more I get to study the subject, the more I learn about the content, the better I get at not only the subject, but also answering questions in an examination. Those are the 2 reasons that I decided to apply to Oxford.
Hi, so I had 3 reasons. I think firstly, the vibes. I think when I visited during the open day, I just fell in love with it. And secondly, similar to Khalid, I really liked the tutorial system. I didn't want to be a statistic in this large lecture hall. I wanted it to be more personal and just more intimate so I could discuss things. Then thirdly, I felt the pressure of having to decide, and I didn't want that. And I felt that Cambridge allowed me to do that with my course, HSPS, where I could do several courses kind of at the same time. So yeah, those are my 3 reasons.
So for me, I didn't know what Cambridge was before joining my school in year 12. So I lived in a smaller town in Kenya, which only had a British education system until year 11 and didn't really know what to do after. But I was very lucky to find my A-level school, and I didn't really know how I would afford that or afford coming to university for Cambridge. But I was really lucky. My headmaster back then, during my interview for the school, was like, I think you can go to Cambridge. I was like, cool, what's that? And yeah, here we are. So I think for me, it was definitely the fact that there was someone who believed in me and helped me realize that actually there was potential and that I could do things. And I had never been to the UK or anything. So it was all quite a mystery. And I didn't Google much. So I didn't actually know much about my course before coming here. But I think looking retrospectively, I like the fact that the engineering course is general for the first 2 years. So you get a lot of insight and in-depth knowledge on different areas of engineering. And you can later choose to specialize or not, which is quite a powerful thing because you don't need to commit from the beginning.
I think for me, the main reason I applied was because of all the choice you have in the course. Because I mean, for me, I knew I always wanted to do maths, but I didn't really know what that involved at uni level or anything. But then because you have so much choice, everyone can kind of choose and like go into down the route they want to, and that's the main reason for me.
So the reason I decided to apply to Cambridge is because I really like the collegiate system. So Cambridge has, I think, around 31 different colleges. And I actually was privileged enough to visit and, go to my college, and I just loved it. And I just really like how you sort of have mini homes and mini communities. So that was one thing that really drew me to Cambridge. And another thing was sort of the course. So I really like the way economics is structured at Cambridge, where you have a chance in your first year to study anything from maths to politics or to history. So I really like the fact that I would be getting such a broad range of things. So so just really drawn to the course. And the economics course at Cambridge is quite mathematical. And that was something I liked as well. So I think the course and the collegiate nature were things that really drew me to Cambridge.
Cool, thank you. So clearly there are lots of, different factors that people have considered, different benefits that the Oxford system has that made people apply. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to move on to our pre-submitted questions, but we'll also be taking live ones. So please ask away in the YouTube live chat. We've got a few country-specific questions about grades, specific grades that each course requires, or various English test requirements. And for those, we always recommend you to visit the university's website for the most updated information. And so I'll now pass it on to Yassine to start with their first pre-submitted question.
The first question is, what are the most notable cultural differences between home and Oxbridge, and were they hard to adapt to? So I think the main one that I noticed when you first get here was you kind of have, unlike in Sudan, you kind of have a set group of friends almost, and you kind of interact with them, and it's separate groups than it is back home. I mean, it's not bad in any way, but it was just something different that I had to adapt to. And another thing that was especially hard to adapt to was being punctual, because I mean, in Sudan, it's not very common to arrive on time to a lot of things. So that was a bit hard to adapt to for the first couple of months, I think.
Personally, yeah, I think I found it different how people here interacted. I think back home in Kenya, people are way more open and way more willing to talk more about themselves from the get-go and so on. And when I came here, I think I found it quite different, that people felt more reserved and felt more to themselves to begin with. And initially I just thought, oh, do they just not like me? But I think later with time, I realized I was just too open. But further down the line, like, I've made great friends and just realized just perhaps people need a bit more time to open as much as I do. I think for me, that was a big one. And also, people here seem to follow rules more. Just like I like that there's more systems and most people in general follow them. For instance, traffic. Like I can cross the road here way a bit more assured that I will not be run over. But yeah, I should not say this, but yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, sometimes as an international student, you do find it hard to adapt to. Like I know I certainly had, like definitely those things about, well, for me anyway, like rules, yes, it feels like it's a little more rigid. But like for me as well, there are a lot of different things I had to adapt to. Like what do you guys think of, like, and I'm opening this up to anyone basically. What about like food? Like food for me was a huge thing. It was a huge difference. And like if you want to, just jump in here, feel free to, because from all the international students I've been talking to, like food is a thing. Food is an important thing that people have in mind. So that anyone who wants to take this, please go ahead and take this point.
Yeah, I think I'll take that because most people who know me, I'm always cooking in my kitchen in the dorm because I came over and I was like, oh, I'll try out the food, and it was less seasoned than I expected. So I started to cook, and that's how I coped with that. But in terms of that cultural difference, I still haven't yet adapted to it.
Yeah, I totally understand you. To the extent, where I've graduated, it's kind of still, yeah, that, it's a factor to consider. And it's quite important as well. You don't think about it that way when you're applying, but it's something to think about. So yeah, so now I'll pass it on to Tabitha to answer a second question about interviews.
Did you have an interview? If so, was it in your home country? How did you prepare for it? So yes, I had an interview. Actually had 2 interviews, and it was not in Nigeria. I had it in Cambridge, so in my college. So I studied in the UK in 6th form. So I studied in Wales, so in Cardiff. So it took a very long bus ride to Cambridge. How did I prepare for my interviews? So you would have written a personal statement beforehand. So I was going over my personal statement, going over the books that I had read on my personal statement. If I get this, I experience it a lot now as a student, where people just message me on LinkedIn saying, hi, Tabitha, I have an interview, economics at Cambridge, how did you prepare? So always feel free to just reach out to people and just try and get information where you can. So like message strangers, DM students that you know. So I was just asking a lot of people about their own interview experiences. Also, one thing with Cambridge economics, I know it's quite mathematical. So I had to go over my maths, so like my basics, differentiation, integration, graph drawing. So just going back to maths and then thinking about how that then applied to economics. So thinking about maths in a more economics context as opposed to just a pure maths form. So I think reading, also you get an idea of what your interview would be like beforehand. So I was told I had a pre-reading and that the other interview was going to be maths and statistics. So I knew what to prepare for. So for the pre-reading, I would just get articles from, The Economist, FT, and just read them and sort of discuss them out loud, to speak to myself in the mirror and say, okay, what did I think about this? I think that was how I prepared.
Yeah, I did have an interview. It was not in my home country. And in terms of preparation, I did a lot of mock interviews. So if you don't really have, you don't have access to your teachers or anything like that, you can just read out loud, try and role play with yourself or stare in the mirror, not stare, but look at yourself in the mirror and record yourself. I had my friends do it for me. Similar to Tabitha, I went on Twitter and I did hashtag A-level results, and I tried to find someone who was international and who did my course, and I messaged them. I was like, oh, can you mentor me and possibly do mock interviews? Then I was always listening to the news because my course is quite political, and I had a huge Google Drive with possible questions. And yeah, that's how I prepared.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to slip in here and put a little disclaimer that with some schools, certainly you'll get a lot more opportunities for mock interviews. And I know some schools will be super keen on, they'll have guidance counselors and teachers who are able to talk to you. But if that's not the case, that's not going to deter your application from making it far basically in the process. So as Maro and Tabitha both mentioned, there are lots of ways of how you can practice with yourself, if that's weird. Or like Maro says, you can talk into a mirror, that's also possible. Yes, I did do that as well. But just kind of just don't be deterred if you don't have these sources of help basically that are in your country basically. There are lots of different resources you can also access online, and like Maro said, you can look on Twitter basically, just trying to work through your process and getting to vocalize your process. And I think that's the most important bit. And I'll now pass it on to Arig.
Okay, so we have a live question from Parleen Bansal asking, how difficult did you find the application process, including the interviews and writing a personal statement? So I think I'll start with the personal statement. Personally, I did not decide on engineering until August, and the Cambridge application deadline is usually 15th of October. So I started on mine like start of September. Honestly, I didn't know what to put in it. I was very lucky. My PE teacher helped me quite a lot. So my PE and my physics teachers helped me quite a lot in that we started by writing like a list of questions, well, a list of bullet points that I could include. And then he helped me try to come up with a structure of like an introduction, and then a bit about my academics, a bit about engineering and why I care about it, and a bit about my extracurriculars, and then finishing up. So I think it was initially very confusing writing a personal statement, but I would say giving it time really helped, because it's one of those things where if you try to do it on the go, you'll forget so many things and have flashbacks. Oh, I could have done that. So I think with that, having time was helpful. And the interviews. So I personally really struggled with the accents of my interviewers when I first came. I was like, what is happening? Like, I think that was the most challenging part. I was also very scared. I didn't know what to do. And my interview was in 3 parts. So my first part was an hour paper answering questions that I did not fully answer a question on. And then there was one interview where we marked my answers together, and one interview where the interviewer just asked me, like, did a few things with cylinders and stuff and asked me questions. And I definitely felt scared after my written stuff, but the interviewers were very reassuring. And like now looking back and like having worked a bit with Access events and with colleges, the interviewer is there to help you. They want to help you make it to Cambridge. They want to bring as much potential out of you as possible. So it is scary, yes, and it is difficult, but they're there to help you through it, is what I realized.
Khalid here. I will probably start as Arik did with the personal statement. Initially, I'd say the personal statement was probably the hardest bit of the application for me. I think with writing a personal statement to universities that you're desperate to get into, there's always this sort of temptation to want to put things on it that you feel are not necessarily why you want to study the subject, or things that are true about yourself and things that you think the admissions officer will be pleased to read and see. And for me, with the personal statement, 2 pieces of advice that really helped me came from my English literature teacher, who told me that you want, in your personal statement, you really want to get stuff that you have read or have experienced that actually made you want to study that subject. And if you're really struggling to find anything of the sort, whether it's a TV show, a book, or even a life experience, if you're struggling to find something to relate to your subjects or degree, then you have to reconsider why exactly you want to study that degree, because maybe you haven't necessarily picked it for the right reasons. But as a caveat to that, you also have to remember that with universities, they care almost as much about not as much, but they do care a degree about the type of person you are. So the things that you think from you enjoy, whether it's swimming, the hobbies, you just need to really get that into the personal statement to kind of convey you're more than just a statistic that's going to belt out 3 A stars. You're also a person who is gonna add something to the pastoral care of the college or university you're going to. With the interviews, I found the build up to the interviews, because you're surrounded by I personally did my interviews at the college, so Balliol College. You're surrounded by so many high performing, high achieving people. So there's some who be quite loud and will be belting out answers and talking about books that you haven't even heard. And when you Google them, you find out they're like these 1,000-page tomes of all things your degree related. But yeah, I wouldn't let that bother you. Like the build up will always be nerve wracking, and getting into the interview itself was also nerve wracking. But you have to remember, it's you're here to enjoy the interview as much as you are there to impress the tutors. You're also there to enjoy. You need to take the experience with both hands, because there's a good chance you might not get the experience again, as well as a good chance you will. But either way, you seize it with both hands and you just really try and engage with the material you've read and the questions they ask you. Whether you amaze them or not, you've gotten that far anyway, so you know you're capable. But at that point, I think it just comes down to how much you're able to exist in the present with the tutor. But that would be my cup of tea on the entire application process.
Thank you. And I think I'll just add in a few things here, because I certainly, personal statements and interviews, like definitely something to think about as you're applying internationally. I think for me, one of the biggest changes was like applying to the UK as opposed to applying to the US or anywhere else, really, because the systems are so drastically different. And for me, that was a bit of a shock, because I was just like, right, okay, then how do I optimize, my efforts to making, one single application, but I can fit the breadth of the US curriculum and also the depth of the UK curriculum. And I'm not sure if any of our panelists here have applied to the US or anything, but they're two totally different things. One thing I think is that the US system, both systems very much holistic, but the US system is very much looking for like broad, interests. Whereas in the UK, especially Oxford, I think they're looking for, a specific interest or a continued, interest in your subject. So instead of, extracurriculars, although those are in fact important, I'd like to highlight the importance of supercurriculars. So these are extracurriculars that are related to your subject, but are not necessarily academic in nature. So for example, I guess if you're doing law, or maybe, Khalid can provide a little bit of insight on this later, but like if you're doing law, have you done Model UN, different types of shadowing, different types of debate, that kind of stuff, that shows that you've engaged with your subject outside of academic context. And that just kind of helps, push or like demonstrate your interest a bit further. But speaking of that question, I feel like we touched on a bit of personal statement as well as interview. So I think I'll let Yassine talk about his interview in the next bit.
So the next question is, what was your interview experience like? And I think for me, it was very subject related. So it wasn't at all about the, because I did maths. So it wasn't related at all to my personal statement. It was all just maths questions. And I think the main thing about it was it's not necessarily difficult topics as such, like stuff you might not have done yet or anything. It's kind of the same stuff you do at school, but kind of trickier questions and stuff you have to think about a lot more, rather than stuff you can just like churn out for exams and that kind of thing. So I think, the main thing with the interview, I think, is being okay. It is okay to say you don't know or you don't understand something, because they're there to like kind of guide you through it. So it's better to just say I'm not sure, or I don't understand that question or something, rather than trying to kind of fluff your way through it or make up something. So yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I also had my interview at college, so at Trinity, and I think looking back, the interview experience is so exciting because you're sitting with an academic who's who's really good at what they do, and they're there to chat to you and basically see how your brain works. And similar to what Yassine was saying, it's nothing new. Some things are new, but basically they're there to help you learn, because they want to see how you learn. They want to see how you answer questions, how you think. And I think one thing that really helped with my interview is speaking out loud. So if you're stuck or if the flow is going, it's to some people it feels unnatural to talk out loud what you're thinking, but it helps the interviewer see your thought process. And in case you're going right, they'll nudge you towards that. Or if you're going wrong, try help you go back more on track. And again, that gives them more of an insight. And yeah, as I mentioned before, my interview was 3 parts. The written questions were quite challenging, I found. I could not fully answer one of them. There were 10 questions for me, and after going with the interviewer, I had only managed to answer 5 somehow. So I think that again emphasizes you don't need to be perfect at your interview. It's not the be all and end all of it. Just try your best, and they're there to help you. Yeah.
I'm going to throw in a side question here based on like the various interview questions we've gotten from from past Q&As, and talks a lot about performance stress during your interview. How do you, or like how did you deal with that? So were there times where you felt like, oh my god, this is going horribly, what am I going to do? Or like when you're in the waiting room, and I know that's a super daunting time, you're just like, oh my god, this moment is going to change my life. Just kind of those things. Does anyone have anything to say about like stress during interviews, or like how to manage that specifically? And I'll open this up to anyone.
I have one. Oh, do you
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So in my second interview, it was the maths one. And I think I had been given a problem. It's like you had a problem sheet and I needed to work through it with the interviewers. And it was like I had figured out the trick, or like the main thing we needed to do, but I couldn't do the differentiation. And I'm like, I've done further maths for years and I don't know why I couldn't do it. Like it wasn't hard to do. And I remember just being so annoyed that like I couldn't figure this one thing out, because it was just, not like it was something I could do. And then at the end of the interview, I went and I asked like, oh, is it fine for me to go back? And he was like, no, like we don't have time. But generally, like just they're not expecting perfection generally. So I think to see that, like they can tell like, okay, I know how to do differentiation, the trick or the part of the question that we really needed you to figure out, you figured that out. So I think sometimes as applicants, we really tend to like nitpick and go into like every single detail and say, oh, I didn't structure that sentence as clearly as I would like. So one thing I would say is just try your best. Like, and also they know that stress happens. They know that students are nervous. So they know that sometimes, things can happen and students make mistakes, but just try your best and really try to remain calm under pressure. And I think also one thing, at least for me with the whole interview experience, one thing I knew that if I spoke to people, because I came from far out, I came to college and I got to spend the night, have dinner in college, all of that. And I knew that if I spoke to people, it would just get me really nervous. So people, like Khalid was saying, that have read like 200 books, I just knew that it would not be good for me. So I said, okay, I'm not going to speak to anyone. And again, this is a very personal thing. So I didn't speak to anyone until after my interview, just because I knew that, it might throw me off. So just find what works for you. If you really want to, go and meet people and all of that, that's great. But I just knew that, okay, speaking to someone that's also applying for economics might not be the best thing or the best tactic for me, because, I'll just inherently start to compare myself to them. And that would just make me, very nervous and just throw me off my game. So just, focus on you, and just, I'm Christian. So if you pray, if you meditate, whatever it is that you need to do, just do that. Yeah.
Cool, thank you for that. And on to Marav to answer a live question.
Okay, so Enigma asks, first of all, I love that username, Enigma. Does Cambridge offer scholarships for African undergraduate students? Short answer, yes, they do. There aren't that many options like that, but they do. Like, for example, I applied to the Cambridge Trust scholarship, which Arig will touch on better, because And yeah, so that's the one that I applied for. But then there are some country-specific scholarships, so that's something you have to like do some research about and actually check the website or form when it comes out. So if you don't get those, I would advise looking externally to get some form of financial support, because I do know that there are other programs that give out scholarships to undergraduate levels. So just as an option, if you don't, by peradventure, you don't actually get those ones.
Yeah, as Mara was saying, so there are a few scholarships. So I'm a Beacon Scholar. So the Beacon Scholarship is aimed at East African students applying, and our scholarship offers several scholarships in different universities all across the UK, and Cambridge was one of our first. And my scholarship works both with the Beacon Scholarship and the Cambridge Trust. And yeah, there's not that many options as of yet, but we hope things will improve in Cambridge and access to international African undergrads will be better with time. But yeah, don't. One thing is, this is something someone told me before I could, like, I knew I could not afford Cambridge, and I knew I wanted to apply, and I had no clue how I was going to get the money because I hadn't heard of the scholarship yet. But someone told me, what are you going to lose by applying? Well, there's the application cost. Hopefully I could take that. But apply. If you get a spot, you will make it work out. I have a friend who's not African, but they funded their international fees here, and that's like the same price as African undergrads would pay. So I would say don't let financial need deter you from applying. Apply, and you never know, it might work out. I was lucky to find this scholarship. This person crowdfunded themselves to get here. It's totally feasible. Like, don't let it stop you.
Yeah, one thing to note just here is to just double check the university's websites, basically, because they're going to have the most updated information on what's available. This could change every year. Just to make sure that you're checking regularly, just so you're updated. Yeah, cool. And I'll now pass it on to Tabitha for another live question.
So we have another live question, and excuse my pronunciation. I've really been trying for the past 20 minutes, from Guganessan Ilavarasan. And the question is, what are considerations to take when selecting a college to apply to? And so many different people would have so many different answers to this question. One resource I would recommend, I think there's a website called whichcambridgecollege.com or something. So just depending on what factors are really important to you. So I'm very much a vibey, philosophical person. So I wanted to visit, and I wanted to get this feeling like, okay, this is the one. So I was privileged. I came with a few friends, like all the way from Cardiff. We took this very, very long coach, and we just went and we saw some colleges, and you can just tell from different, so like Trinity, they didn't let us in. I was like, bye. I went to some other ones. So it was really just about sort of the vibe. And then I came to the college I'm at, Jesus, and I just really loved it. I think another thing on the day, so Jesus has a black porter, and porters are like your, can I say, sort of receptionists? Yeah. And they had one on duty that day, and he was just so nice and so welcoming. And I think it's little things like that that's just like, okay, if I come here, I can see somebody that looks like me and somebody that's really just kind and open and supportive. And he, obviously to this day, like I'm at Jesus now and I see him and we chat. So I think it was, again, sort of just the vibe. But obviously some people, it's very important, okay, what financial support their college provides, what the accommodation is like, distance to where your lectures are, what else? But I think, again, the thing with colleges is like, obviously apply and do your research, but you can get pulled. So don't fall too in love with a college, if that makes sense, because there's a risk that you would have done all the research and said, okay, I think Trinity Hall is a perfect college for me, and you get pulled somewhere else. But just decide what factors are most important to you. Do you want a bathroom? Do you want to be close to lectures? I think I initially started off with some sort of spreadsheet and was editing. Everybody just has a very, very different system. But I think ultimately for me, it came down to just visiting and getting a really sort of good positive energy from mine.
Okay, so unlike Tabitha, I never visited Oxford until the day of my interview, actually. Um, for me, the range of factors that went into picking my college were, first of all, where it was located. So my college, Balliol, was probably one of the most centrally located colleges in Oxford. So that played a massive part for me. But I feel like I could necessarily list out all of the reasons I chose to pick my college, but I don't necessarily believe that would be relevant to you. It could be anything really. One of my good mates at college, he chose to go to Balliol simply because, like me, he liked that it was central, but also because Balliol lets us have free access to one of the public pools within Oxford, and he's a massive swimmer. So for him, that was a massive thing. And then you get colleges like St. John's, which are just fabulously rich, and they give their students like massive book grants. They also are, because they're a richer college, it also means they have more money to spend on access. So I've heard of occasions where St. John's, if your financials background is not enough to sustain you throughout Oxford, they sometimes offer accommodation free for the 3 years, which I know is a lot easier for them to do than other colleges who rely on those fees to fund themselves. So there's a range of factors, but I would say as a rule of thumb, general stuff like location, the size of your cohort, the or I mean, there'll also be things where some colleges don't do the subject that you want to study. I also found that some people, me included, also like to research the tutors that they'll be studying from in the modules that they are excited the most about. And if sometimes people choose their colleges based on their tutor, maybe they've read about him or watched some clips about him, and they just were like they wanted to learn from that person. But range of factors from finances to location to accommodation. So my college, Balliol, only lets us live in 2 years out of the 3 years. We have to, most students move out in the second year. A small percentage of them are able to live in college owned accommodation away from college, but the vast majority of us have to go into private accommodation. And for some people, that's a game changer, and they prefer to apply to colleges where all 3 years are accommodated. But on the flip side to that, you get people who actually want to live out of college for one of the years. So once again, a range of factors. I think you just need to compile a list of the things that you think will impact you the most, or what you can. Are you the sort of person who likes to go on a long cycle? Then maybe you want to you don't mind picking a college further out, or you type of person who likes to be in the city center, those kind of things. And then, as you Tabitha already mentioned, which college.uk, I can't remember the name of the website, but there are websites to help you with making a decision.
Yeah, just one thing, again, me cutting in. Certainly a lot of factors to keep in mind when you're considering a college. And it's true that different colleges will, some will be older, some will be newer, some will be larger, smaller. They'll be in different financial positions. That's true. One thing to emphasize, I think, is that regardless of which college you apply to study at, the level of teaching is going to be the same. The quality of teaching is going to be the same. So you don't have to worry that, oh, just because, I'm at a smaller college, or I'm at a newer or older college, that, my teaching is like the quality of teaching I'm going to get isn't going to be that great because, bigger colleges have got more money, that kind of stuff. The truth is, a lot of these teachings anyway are essentially organized by the university. So, and to some extent, yes, the quality will be the same throughout, regardless of which college you apply to. And one thing also to emphasize here is, we know during COVID that's probably not possible. Well, it shouldn't be possible for you to go visit your college in person. So what you could do in that case, of course, you can talk to people if you already know them within these colleges, but also to visit each university's virtual open days. And at these open days, you'll get the opportunity to talk to current students about what it's like to study there. You can try to get a sense of what the college is like virtually, if that's any consolation, but just to put these virtual open days on your radar as well. And now I will pass it on to Khalid to answer about whether he applied to any other universities in the UK.
Yeah, I did apply to other universities in the UK. I applied to 4 other universities in the UK. I applied to Durham University for law again. I applied to University College London. I applied to London School of Economics, and I applied to, I think it was King's College London. Might have been Warwick though. I can't actually remember what the last one was. I don't know if there's much to say about that, except I would say I feel for not necessarily, but I would say it is sometimes easy to get fixated on that Oxbridge sort of that dream of Oxbridge of attending. The only caveat I would add is when it comes to applying to the universities is to make sure that you thoroughly investigate and research as much, maybe not nearly as much as you are into your first choice, but definitely a good amount into the other universities that you're applying to. I think that a lot of the times people just scroll up look at a league table and then just base their choices off of that. I think because, applying to university, nothing is guaranteed. There's no guarantee you get your first choice, and you would hate to now be saddled with a choice that you've not really learned that much about, and you've just added onto your application as a second thought. So the only caveat I would add is focus hard on applying to Oxford and putting your application together for Oxford, but also make sure to take other universities into consideration and that you research them. So if you do end up getting saddled with one of them as a choice, you are not necessarily content, but you have done your research to that university, so you know exactly what that means for you now to be attending that university instead of what could have been your first choice.
Yeah, so I applied to LSE, which was my insurance, UCL, Warwick, and Manchester. Obviously, we're seeing a pattern of me loving London, and Cambridge is really close to London. So yeah, just do your research and make sure you love the other universities that you're applying to apart from Oxbridge.
And now, again, back to Mauro for another question about cultural societies.
Yeah, so are you members of any cultural societies? If so, describe your experiences at these societies. Yeah, I am part of ACS. I am also the international officer at KUSU BME, which is like the student union for people of, and they represent people of color, the students of color. I think that has been great. Most of my friends are from there, and I think it gives me a very different experience from just, because my college is rather very British and very white. So I think it gives me an element of familiarity, and it has just been fun. My best moments are, with ACS and like all the other cultural societies.
So yeah, just adding to that, there are also lots more societies that are more local, you could say. Like, for example, there's a Sudanese society, East African society, that kind of thing. And I think they've been really good because you meet a lot of people who are like you, essentially, and you can relate to. And it's, I don't know, it kind of makes it feel more like home than, because like Mara was saying, there are lots of white people around. So it is nice to go to these societies and kind of meet people.
Yeah, and the next question we had is, how did you choose your subject? At any point, did you consider a different subject? Yes, so before deciding to do engineering, I wanted to do politics. And my parents told me, how are you going to eat? How are you going to afford living? And hence, yeah. So I had to rethink my whole life. I also considered medicine at some point because, of course, I'm Arab. And yeah, but eventually I decided to do engineering because what is it that I hate most about politicians? They speak a lot and say they can do things that they actually don't know or can't do. So I decided to do engineering to gain the skills to hopefully implement policies in the future.
So before I decided to study economics, I actually wanted to study engineering, and I changed my mind in year 12, which is actually quite late. So I entered sixth form, planning to study engineering. And I think I just realized I really wasn't passionate about engineering. So what Cheryl was saying about getting involved in super curricula is so important to, obviously for your personal statement, but also to realize if you like it. So I joined like the engineering society at school, and I was just like, no, like I don't like this one bit. I did work experience of like this engineer, and I was just like, no, I really don't like it. I just really wasn't passionate about the subject. And I think if you're going to be studying a degree for 3-4 years, like obviously, we're African, so like family is important, what families say is very, but you're going to be the one in the library doing the degree. So just make sure it's something that you like, make sure it's something that you enjoyed. So at the same time, like I was losing passion for engineering and just realized I really wasn't passionate about this. I became really passionate about economics. And at the time, so this was 2016, Nigeria was experiencing a recession. There was like a foreign exchange, crisis. And I just really became interested in why were all of these things happening and what could be done about it. So that was just sort of what, changed my mind towards economics. Fortunately, I had the perfect subjects to just switch without having to change my A-level subjects. But just make sure you're really, really passionate about whatever you want to apply to. Generally, once you get to uni, it makes all the difference.
Okay, the next question is, did any of you deal with imposter syndrome or feeling isolated? If so, how did you overcome this? Yes, I think there's not something too specific to Oxford. Obviously, just moving into university, I cried for 2 months straight. Sorry, guys. And I wanted to go home. And also just being with, like everyone has said, being with brilliant people, it was really, really hard for me. I felt like I didn't, maybe it was a fluke that I got there. But the only thing I can tell you, I don't have a cushy answer other than time. So it was finally my third term that was like, oh, I'm actually not bad at this, Also, another thing is I wrote a list of my strongest characteristics, my strongest points. And I said, oh, I can see why they took you in. So like, just do things like that to hype yourself up. And with feeling isolated, join societies. I can't recommend them enough.
Yeah, for me, imposter syndrome was real. And I think it's just like most people coming to Oxford or Cambridge will have been some of the top at their schools, and then you come here and I felt hella mediocre. I was like, used to be smart, not anymore. And I think what I realized is just like everyone seems way more on it than they actually are. So I think with time, I came to the realization everyone looks like they have their life together, but they really don't. So I think for me, it was just like chatting to friends about it. And I think my biggest support network to begin with was international students, because we shared the sense of missing home and being away from home, in addition to the Cambridge or just university imposter syndrome of not knowing what you're doing and stuff. But yeah, as Mara said, time is quite special. And for me, it was just like finding good support networks, both academic staff and students. So yeah, just like knowing everyone's in the same boat. It's fine to speak out. The number of times I've cried to someone is a bit concerning, but it's fine. But yeah.
I feel like we need to move this on a little more uplifting end, even though it's completely true. Yes, there are moments where you will miss home, where you will cry, and in Ree's case, a bit concerning amount. But hopefully, hopefully it gets better with time. I will pass this last question on to Khalid. I think he wants to answer about what his best university experience has been like so far. And I think I'll also open this up to anyone else who has something to add in to the end, simply because I think we need to balance out the concerning amounts of crime that Reed has been doing. So let me pass it on to Khalid.
My best university experience this year was probably the end of Michaelmas Christmas dinner. I feel like it's at the very end of a very hectic 8 weeks in which you've moved away from home, living with a completely brand new set of people who you've never met, different backgrounds, and then you just kind of sit in the hall. You sit in the hall with all the friends you've made in that first term, surrounded by all the students in college. And I feel like that was probably the first memory that hit me, like, oh yeah, I'm at Oxford. I've been here for actually a term. I've survived 8 weeks of non-stop essays, non-stop work. And yeah, somehow, despite all of that, I'm feeling pretty good. Kind of sad actually that the term is ending. So yeah, that was probably, I feel like just because that's the moment where you kind of realize it's a lot of work, but it is worth it. It is worth it at the end of the day. It is worth it.
To bring some positivity, I think my favorite time was the end of my first year exams. So usually the Trinity engineers, older years, take the freshers down for a barbecue at the river, and then we all jump into the river. And the moment my face hit the water was just like, whew, I am done. And that was amazing. I think that was one of the happiest days ever, just like finishing exams and knowing, you know what, I don't have to do that much work for a while. And it felt good and it felt worth it. And it just felt like all the effort you had put in was actually for something. So yeah.
Amazing to hear. Like, we do hear a lot of, you know, stories about how much work it is. And it's true, it is a lot of work. But I try to balance that out with an equal amount of like having fun, play, because, you know, this is university after all. And you should study, but you should also definitely be doing other things while you study, basically. So now I think I'll just get all our panelists to kind of give, you know, a simple one-liner piece of advice they wish they had gotten when they were applying from the home country. Just sort of, you know, like what's one thing that they wish they knew when they were applying. So let's start with Khalid.
Probably don't be afraid to embrace like what it is about you, what it is about your home country that makes you you, and your home country you. Like, don't feel the need to conform to Western ideals of how they do things. If you know, be as authentically yourself as you can be. It's probably the one piece of advice I'd give anyone.
I would say that you have every right to apply. Like, it's just one spot. I would say don't feel like you don't deserve to be there. Just try your best, but definitely do apply if you want to. Like, you wouldn't regret it, trust me.
I would say reach out to people, because I think in Cambridge and just in general, academics look scary and they look unapproachable sometimes. But I've had some of the best conversations with people in the library or other academic staff who've really been there for me and really helped me. So just like know that academic and non-academic staff and students are always willing to listen and to help you and have a laugh. Yeah.
In terms of the application itself, I think the most important thing is showing your interest, because I mean everyone's really good at the subject, so they're really looking for you to be really invested in the subject and keen to learn more about it.
And show you're passionate about the subject you're applying to, and show that passion. And just last thing, you deserve to be there as much as anybody else, and you can do it. So just believe in yourself, genuinely.
All super uplifting. Thank you very much, guys. And on that note, that's the end of our applying to Oxbridge from African countries Q&A, and also the end of this cycle of our international undergraduates live Q&A series. So I hope you'll enjoy. I hope you enjoyed. Geez, I hope you'll join me in giving a big thank you to our panelists for giving up their time to be here, as well as the Cambridge International Admissions Office for helping us organize today's event. Each university will also be holding their open days and admissions webinars soon, so keep an eye out for signups for those. And I believe they're on September 17th, September 18th. I'm not entirely sure, but do go visit the university's websites just to check those out. Make sure to also visit insideuni.org and subscribe to your YouTube channel to stay up to date with our videos. That includes today's Q&A if you want to rewatch it, and our future video series on interviews and personal statements, since we've gotten a lot of questions on those. Give us a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and because, well, that lets us know what's helping you. And as I mentioned earlier, There are also a lot more free resources on our website, so do feel free to go check those out as well. In the meantime, let us know your thoughts on this Q&A or on future events you'd like to see by getting in touch via our social media, which I think will be linked in the description below, and Tammy, our moderator, will also put it in the chat box as well. And please do follow us for updates. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our future events. Bye.